A rough outline of the auditory development is sort of at around the 10 weeks of gestation, the inner ear starts to form up. And even though the inner ear is structured around sort of the mid-pregnancy, it doesn't actually yet transmit any information to the brain. And those connections more or less start to form around 25, 26 weeks of gestation. And then the first connection from the inner ear are reaching the thalamus, basically the parts of the midbrain, and from the midbrain towards the auditory cortices. And usually we think that around this last trimester of pregnancy, or the last 3 months of pregnancy, are the times when the baby hears in an adult fashion. There have been studies suggesting that the babies react to sounds even earlier, but if you think of a hearing in adult sense, so that the auditory information actually reaches the brain or the cortex, then that only takes place around the last trimester. Well, if we think of what we're doing when we're sort of interacting with our bump, it's sort of, we have this lovely term which we call auditory home. So bonding with the bump, you're sort of in a way building an auditory home for the baby, where the baby will then be living after it's been born. And this auditory home consists all sort of auditory experiences, such as the native language of the parent, specific features of what kind of a music, for example, the parents like to listen to, and so on and so forth. And those are sort of things which the baby can then cling into once it's born, and it can sort of recognize these things from the environment. It can feel safe, and it can sort of focus simply on its own well-being and growth instead of being more or less worried about its own well-being and future. So what we're actually doing by interacting with the fetus is sort of building this secure environment for the baby. So in 2013 we published actually 2 studies on fetal learning, but possibly the more interesting one in terms of music would be the study we did with the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star melody. So basically what we did is we gave a CD containing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and gave it to a group of pregnant women and told them to play the melody repeatedly 5 times a week, 15 minutes each day, to their fetuses. And then what we did is look at how their brains reacted to the melody in comparison to a control group who had not been exposed to the same melody. We followed up these infants until the age of 4 months with no additional Twinkle Twinkle Little Star playing. And what we found was that both at birth and at the age of 4 months, the group that had been listening to Twinkle Twinkle Little Star still reacted more strongly to the melody in terms of brain activity than the group that had not been exposed to it. The question on what the baby actually hears in the womb is a kind of a complicated one, in the sense that we can't actually study the auditory environment in humans. Some of the studies suggest that the womb is actually quite a noisy environment. So what the baby is, or the fetus is exposed to, is mostly sounds of the digestion or the digestive system, plus of course the heartbeat. But one of the most common and loudest noises is actually the voice of the mother. It's not because the voice of the mother would be anyhow sort of more prevalent. It's simply that it's transmitted to the uterus in a different fashion. So basically, when a mother speaks, the voice carries through, or is carried through the bones, and that causes it to be slightly more loud than anything else. But if you think of sort of what the auditory environment of the fetus sounds like, then the easy way to demonstrate it is simply by putting a hand over your mouth and then trying to speak. So that is more or less what the baby hears. It's quite sort of a muffled speech or muffled noises, and if you think in terms of speech, what the baby is mostly exposed to is the rhythm, intonation patterns, and so on. In terms of parenting or child development, you should do something that feels natural to you. I mean, your baby will be fine even though you don't talk to your bump. People form attachment or attach to their children or their siblings in different fashion, and if talking to your bump is something that's obviously not for you, you shouldn't worry. You can't ruin your baby by not talking to your bump. But if it feels something you would like to do, there is no harm in it. It may help you sort of to form some sort of bond with your unborn child already, but don't worry, if it doesn't come to you naturally, then it doesn't come to you. You will still be just as a good mother or father after the baby has been born. It's often asked sort of, what is the benefit of talking to your bump, or what is the benefit of trying to achieve some sort of an interaction between the parent and the fetus? Mostly there are two schools about it. Some researchers who are looking mostly at preterm birth are claiming that it's actually not relevant at all. And in terms of simply brain development, that might actually be true. I mean, you can't, in a sense, the brain doesn't change that drastically. But what actually happens, in my opinion, is that you're starting to build a bridge which starts to sort of form a basis of interaction, sort of a basis of means of sort of communicating with the parent and the unborn child. And that sort of, usually when you develop this sort of a bond with your bump, it helps or it sort of promotes well-being, since you're already sort of preparing for the baby to be alive, to be sort of born, and then you sort of are interested in its well-being. And that usually is something which is associated with extremely good development. So in that sense, I do feel that it's extremely relevant sort of to form some sort of bond with your bump.